Mahaley came out on the hilltop and rang the breakfast bell. After the hired men went up to the house, Claude slipped into the barn to see that Molly had got her share of oats. She was eating quietly, her head hanging, and her scaly, dead-looking foot lifted just a little from the ground. When he stroked her neck and talked to her, she stopped grinding and gazed at him mournfully. She knew him, and wrinkled her nose and drew her upper lip back from her worn teeth to show that she liked being petted. She let him touch her foot and examine her legs. When Claude reached the kitchen, his mother was sitting at one end of the breakfast table, pouring weak coffee. His brother and Danny and Jerry were in their chairs, and Mahaley was baking griddle cakes at the stove. A moment later, Mr. Wheeler came down the enclosed stairway and walked the length of the table to his own place. He was a very large man, taller and broader than any of his neighbors. He seldom wore a coat in summer, and his rumpled shirt bulged out carelessly over the belt of his trousers. His florid face was clean-shaven, likely to be a trifle tobacco-stained about the mouth, and it was conspicuous both for good nature and coarse humor, and for an imperturbable physical composure. Nobody in the county had ever seen Nat Wheeler flustered about anything, and nobody had ever heard him speak with complete seriousness. He kept up his easy-going, jocular affability, even with his own family. As soon as he was seated, Mr. Wheeler reached for the 2-pint sugar bowl and began to pour sugar into his coffee. Ralph asked him if he were going to the circus. Mr. Wheeler winked. "I shouldn't wonder if I happened in town sometime before the elephants get away." He spoke very deliberately, with a state of Maine drawl, and his voice was smooth and agreeable. "You boys better start in early, though. You can take the wagon and the mules and load in the cowhides. The butcher has agreed to take them." Claude put down his knife. "Can't we have the car? I've washed it on purpose." "And what about Dan and Jerry? They want to see the circus just as much as you do, and I want the hides should go in. They're bringing a good price now." "I don't mind about your washing the car. Mud preserves the paint, they say, but it'll be all right this time, Claude." The hired men haw-hawed, and Ralph giggled. Claude's freckled face got very red. The pancake grew stiff and heavy in his mouth and was hard to swallow. His father knew he hated to drive the mules to town, and knew how he hated to go anywhere with Dan and Jerry. As for the hides, they were the skins of 4 steers that had perished in the blizzard last winter through the wanton carelessness of these same hired men, and the price they would bring would not half pay for the time his father had spent in stripping and curing them. They had lain in a shed loft all summer, and the wagon had been to town a dozen times. But today, when he wanted to go to Frankfort clean and carefree, he must take these stinking hides and 2 coarse-mouthed men, and drive a pair of mules that always brayed and balked and behaved ridiculously in a crowd. Probably his father had looked out of the window and seen him washing the car, and had put this up on him while he dressed. It was like his father's idea of a joke. Mrs. Wheeler looked at Claude sympathetically, feeling that he was disappointed. Perhaps she, too, suspected a joke. She had learned that humor might wear almost any guise. When Claude started for the barn after breakfast, she came running down the path, calling to him faintly. Hurrying always made her short of breath. Overtaking him, she looked up with solicitude, shading her eyes with her delicately formed hand. "If you want I should do up your linen coat, Claude, I can iron it while you're hitching," she said wistfully. Claude stood kicking at a bunch of mottled feathers that had once been a young chicken. His shoulders were drawn high, his mother saw, and his figure suggested energy and determined self-control. "You needn't mind, Mother." He spoke rapidly, muttering his words. "I'd better wear my old clothes if I have to take the hides. They're greasy, and in the sun they'll smell worse than fertilizer." "The men can handle the hides, I should think. Wouldn't you feel better in town to be dressed?"